Welcome to a very special episode of IMS Radio. We'll be talking about the history of Maryland transfers, which is becoming more prevalent now, but it wasn't so much in the past. We've taken a look deep into the history of Maryland transfers, and we've created an all-time incoming transfer team and an all-time outgoing transfer team.
Yeah, with the coming of the portal, we feel like it's kind of the beginning of a new era. So, I mean, the way the team looks now, over the past, 30, 40 years of transfers, more than that, will look completely different probably in the next 5 years. You imagine you might have guys take over these top spots, in the next class. Like if you're a freshman right now, you might have that many transfers in and out that augment or such good players, they would end up on these types of lists. So it's kind of like a good start point, right? To look back at the past and see what we had and to look forward and see where, transfers are just going to be. It's just going to be an every year occurrence that you just get used to. And it's like free agents in football. It's just a whole new realm.
Whole new world. And spoiler alert, at least one modern player since the NIL transfer rules changed is on this list. So there you go. Little sneak peek there.
Yes. You can probably guess who.
You probably guess who it might be. We're recording this on, what is today's date? November 21st, 2024. So if people watch this in the future, the team is currently 4-1 in the 2024-25 season. They lost a close game to Marquette, which so many chances at missed free throws and layups. And then they just won their
brutal Maryland tease.
Yeah, the second largest margin of victory in the history of the program against a bad team, but still. They blew out teams the way the Stevie Francis teams were blowing out teams. And that was a top 5 team in the country. So,
yep.
I don't know. So they looked pretty good against Marquette, wouldn't you say, and really had a chance to win. I think your call last week where you said they're very good, they just may not be ready for a team of the sort of maturity and savvy and experience of Marquette, and that played out kind of that way.
And now you know why I wanted to spend 10 minutes of this episode talking about that Marquette game, because it happened exactly like I said it would. I think Maryland is good enough to beat that team in about a month or two, but right now,
agreed,
just couldn't quite make it work. But you can see the talent's real. I think that's, if you're a Maryland fan right now, and it feels like it's probably going to be like an every year thing where the season starts, you look at the team on paper, like, oh, this guy, put up 17 and 8 at a, Midwestern Conference school. Okay, that should translate a little bit. And we got this other guy coming from over here. He was a bench player at Michigan, but maybe that'll, maybe can add something. And every year you're going to try and spend these first couple of weeks or months even trying to learn whether these guys' games and the stuff that they've been able to do on paper is able to translate not only to Maryland for the Big Ten and to fitting into a team context with all the other new guys coming in. And so far, I think pretty much so good for this Maryland team. It's just Marquette was just asking a little too much too early for them.
Yeah, give me Marquette in the tournament right now. I will take that right now. Maryland will beat them. Say Marquette's a 4 seed, Maryland's a 5 seed, or 3 and 6, something like that. Give me that. Maryland will beat them to get to the Sweet 16. I will take that if you offered it right now.
I think it's entirely possible. I mean, Maryland matches up pretty well against them. You saw Derek Queen had another great game, which is another good sign for him being a true freshman. You've got as many questions about him as you do these other players coming in. Gillespie obviously has shown that his game is going to translate. Miguel did a few good things. Rice has done some good stuff. Even DHS was the reason they were able to pull off that Maryland tease at the end, even though he couldn't hit those 2 free throws to tie it with 14 seconds left. So there's a lot of positives. I'm not a moral, me on this show. I am not a moral victories kind of guy. But, I mean, if you're just trying to game out how this team's going to look when they start playing in the Big Ten, you got to feel pretty good about this. Marquette went and beat Purdue the other night, too. And they're number 6 in the country. They smoked them. And Purdue had just come off a win beating Alabama, who was number 2, I think. So Marquette's good. Like, that is a legit good team. And Maryland worked them for most of that game. They just couldn't quite hold on or make enough things work. It still worries me a little bit with the Willard offense in terms of you getting these scoring droughts and things just look a little stable. And honestly, I think Willard kind of killed his team a little bit by trying to steal some rest for his starters trying to sneak to those under 12 timeouts in both halves, where Marquette ended up going on runs that were basically their winning margin. So I think everybody had a lot to learn coming off of that game. But, I mean, I don't know how you can watch that one with a little bit of perspective and say, okay, we lost the game. It's fine. This is going to be a pretty good team.
It's not just a moral victory. In the world of KenPom and analytics, if you stay this close to Marquette and they blow out these other teams, that matters. It improves your analytics. So it's not just moral victory. Losing to them by 4 is a good result when they're a top 10 or 15 team. That means you're close to that too.
Absolutely. So, I will only add this. Because of the way that Willard is scheduled this year, they're playing the MAC teams, not MAC like Wednesday night Maction, like MAC and AAC, the worst basketball conference in D1 right now.
Mid-Atlantic Athletic Conference, MAAC.
I think that's right. I think it's right. They call it the MAC, and it bothers me because the MAC is Tuesday and Wednesday night Maction. That's a different thing. It's Middle American Conference. This is the MAC, and they're not good. They're really not good. And Maryland plays like half the teams in that conference.
No, but if you're going to play them, you beat them by 71, and that's what they did.
Yes, and if they beat all of those teams by 71, then maybe that will help offset some of the rankings. Or at least 40, right?
Right.
But if you're playing so many teams that are so down in the dregs of college basketball, and if you might have assumed coming into the season that maybe Villanova or Syracuse, the other two kind of name matchups for their kind of out-of-conference schedule, might have been good. But Villanova looks like absolute garbage, and Syracuse isn't particularly good either. So Marquette ended up being kind of the only way to get a marquee out-of-conference win with this schedule just being what it is. So that's a bit of a bummer. But I don't think this – after you watch the way they played so far, this does not appear like a team that's going to be closer to the bubble than maybe we thought it was. It appears much more like a team that's going to fight for top 25 all year.
I think they're a higher seed in the first round of the tournament. I think I would probably agree with that at this very moment on November 21st. Somewhere between 4 and 7 or 8. I really do. I think they're a top 25, which is 4, 5, or 6, like even could be. But Sunday, as you said, is Villanova. Just to give everybody the context where we are right now, I'm going to that game in Newark, New Jersey. I will be there, and I'll see all you guys at, I think it's called Reed's. I don't know. But I will be there. They're playing Villanova. They just barely lost to Marquette. They just trounced Canisius. Is that who it was?
Yeah, I think so.
Remember. Okay.
They got to whoop Villanova. They got to absolutely that is a bad team. They've got to put them in the ground. I mean, they need that one bad.
And they have looked good with the help of a bunch of transfers, which leads us into
segue.
I'm so good at that, aren't I? Which leads us into the reason we are here, the Maryland basketball all-time transfer teams. And as I said at the beginning of the show, we did an incoming team, and an outgoing team. So without further ado, let us present our beautiful PowerPoint. Sorry, it's not a
gorgeous
spreadsheet. Look at that. It almost kind of looks like a basketball court. That's why I chose that one.
Look at that font.
So it looks pretty good, right? It's beautiful. Yes. November 2024, Maryland all-time basketball transfer teams.
Yes, and what we need to do, Larry, if we're still like alive in like 3 or 4 years, we need to come back and do. Yeah, we need to come back and have like the team for like just the next like 3 or 4 years against this team.
Right. So here we go. Considerations. Like we said, it's transfers in and out of Maryland. Players from the 70s, it was difficult to find data for. I went through, by the way, the entire Maryland history roster, not just transfers. I've got a spreadsheet of hundreds of players and all their data. The guys in the 70s, sometimes it's hard to find data. So when we're comparing current players with them, it's a little tough sometimes.
People are turning this off because they're really disgusted you couldn't find like data about like Bucky LaRue, who transferred out in 1958.
Hey, you read my spreadsheet, Paul.
Oh, damn it.
You just see what you just did. You told on yourself. You actually studied. You prepared. You read my spreadsheet. Okay.
Is that a real name that I just came up with?
No. All right.
Okay. Damn it. I thought there might have been some like weird didactic memory thing going on there.
The data comes from umturfs.com, Wikipedia. sportsreference.com, college basketball. Just so you know, if there's any errors, blame those sites. We allowed JUCO transfers. Okay. That might be a little hint there.
There's a hint.
We did top 5 plus honorable mentions. Okay. Here we go.
Oh, by the way, shout out to Sean Foreman, my boy, he's the president of Sports Reference. So there you go.
Oh, well, there you go. Outgoing transfers, number 5, we have Mr. Seth Allen, who played at Maryland from 2013 to 2014, then at Virginia Tech 2016 to 17, and he did pretty well in Maryland.
He's a good player.
Yeah, 56 games, 9.8 points, 2.1 rebounds, 2.6 assists. He went to Virginia Tech, had a few more games there, averaged 14, 2.7 and 2.9 assists. He also made an ACC sixth man.
Yeah, good player. He was literally Turgeon's like hand-picked guy right off the bat, I think, when he came in. Was he committed somewhere else?
I don't remember.
He was committed somewhere I don't think he was a Texas A&M commit or anything, but I'm pretty sure he was a guy that Turge had gone after for a while and kind of decided, like, this is my point guard. And he ended up being a pretty decent player at Maryland, but obviously once Melo Trimble showed up, that was kind of that.
And by the way, on these outgoing transfers, it's kind of like, I guess you would say the most painful transfer is number 1. And then going down from there, like people who
this is the 5th most painful.
Right, exactly. Like either they were very good at Maryland or they went on to be very good or both or something like that. And it really stinks that they left. Okay.
And and you will notice as we go through this, these are not a lot of particularly painful outgoing transfers for Maryland.
That's a takeaway we'll see at the end when we look at the teams. Number 4, Nick Faust.
Nicholas J. Baltimore Esquire.
Nicky Baltimore and his famous quote. Should we say it?
That's up to you, buddy.
I'm not going to say it.
I get yelled at enough for that stuff.
Yeah, me too. I'm not going to say it. You guys know the quote.
You know the quote.
Okay. Nicky Faust, he was a shooting guard at Maryland from 2012 to 2014. By the way, that's 3 years. It really like 2011-12 season. So I just used the last year of their date. He played 102 games at Maryland, 9.3 points, 3.8 rebounds, 2.2 assists, 1.0 steals. He made the ACC All-Freshman team. At the time, people were like, hey, this guy might be good. Transferred to Long Beach State after sitting out a year because you used to have to do that. Played there in 2016. He played 35 games, accumulated tons of stats, 17.4 points, 6.1 rebounds, and more. He was first-team All-Big West, and he made the Big West All-Tournament team. So a very successful season after he left and pretty solid, despite not living up to his ranking, solid numbers as a Terp.
Yeah, he was very, very anchored by that ranking, I think. And the fact that when he showed up on campus that summer, there was a lot of talk of like one and done stuff, which was kind of silly, obviously, in the end. But he was one of those guys who was committed to Gary and I think Bino before he had retired. And then Turge had to kind of fight to bring him in. He had to fight to bring him in, and he also was trying to fight to keep Justin Anderson, who ended up not being a big fan of Delonte. What's his name? It's his assistant coach.
Hill?
Delonte Hill, yes. His family was not a big fan with Delonte Hill, so he decommitted and went to Virginia and had a successful career. But Nicky Faust stayed pretty good. Again, a decent player, but I think by the time Turgeon had kind of loaded up that roster for 2014, 2015 going in there, he was pretty clearly not going to be a huge part of that. Didn't seem to mesh with Melo Trimble all that well. So it kind of made sense for both parties. And he found his level. He was a good player in a Big West, and, good for him. But certainly did leave a few burned bridges on his way out the door.
And I just remember watching him, and it seemed like he just had either had no concept of the offense or just didn't give a shit. And I think it's the second one. He just didn't care. Like maybe running a play, he would get it, and then the play's over. The other four are like, what are you doing? And he would do some crazy thing and jack up some ridiculous shot. And it was like, Nick, what is going on here, guy? Like, There's supposed to be plays. You're supposed to be in a position. Like
the guy just had
picks,
no conscience whatsoever. I mean, he was just out there to get his, and at times he did, and then you could dream a little bit, but most of the time he did not, and that's why he left. So,
all right, let's move on to number 3, Daryl Morsell. Daryl Morsell, beloved Terp. He played at Maryland from 2018 to 2021. 126 games as a Terp. That's a full career. He averaged 8.7 points, 4 rebounds, 2.2 assists, and those numbers are low. As a freshman, he did almost nothing, and a little better as a sophomore. By his junior and senior year, he was an absolute vital part of the rotation. He was the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. That's really good. He went on to Marquette. He played there for one season in 2022. 31 games. He averaged 13.4 points, 3.5 rebounds, 2.5 assists, and 1.2 steals. Great player.
Excellent player, man. And that was one of those, he took a 5th COVID year and you decided you did not want to stay at Maryland for that. And that's completely understandable. He had played four full years and he was a bit of a throwback player in a lot of ways, not only because he was kind of a defense first guy, a bit of a glue guy at the small forward, but he just seemed to average 9 points, 6 boards, and 3 steals, just like a Johnny Rhodes, kind of like I wouldn't say he wasn't as good as Johnny Rhodes, but say a working man's Johnny Rhodes, like that kind of stuff. And then he was able to go to Marquette in his 5th year and really shine and be a part of a good team. So I can't really get upset about guys who stay at Maryland for 4 years, took that COVID year to try something different. That's one that'll just never bother me. But by the time he was a senior, he was an excellent, excellent player.
And it's hard to argue with his decision. He left, and that was the year that Maryland just tanked, and Tertian left. That was 8 games.
Yeah, he made the right decision.
Hard to argue with the decision, although you hate to see it. Maybe if he had stayed, it would have been a different year. It clearly would have been, but so be it. Let's move on to number 2, Steve Hood. A lot of current people alive, kids now, are not going to remember Steve Hood, but check out the numbers on Steve Hood and the accolades. He played at Maryland 87 to 88. He's part of the group of transfers that left because of the sanctions and the impending bans, postseason bans and TV bans and all of that stuff. He was one of the people caught up in that. There were about 4 or 5 guys who were really good players. He's one of them. He played 55 games at Maryland, 10.8 points, 3.1 rebounds, and 2 assists. In his first 2 years as freshman and sophomore, those are very good numbers. He went on to JMU, and yes, it's down a level, but he played there from 90 to 91, 2 years. He played 60 games, averaged 21.4 points a game, 3.8 rebounds, 1.6 assists. He was the CAA Player of the Year both seasons he was there. He was the CAA All-Tournament team and the number 42 pick in the NBA draft, the 2nd rounder.
Yeah, so the one thing, the history of the kind of bias thing through Gary showing up gets a little lost in the sauce, but Bob Wade gets a pretty raw deal in a lot of ways. He did put together like some really, really talented teams.
Really good players. And
was a pretty good coach too. And nothing that he got nailed for by the NCAA was stuff that nobody else was doing in college basketball. Like I always look back and feel a little bit bad for that guy. He just got caught up in the wake of the whole bias thing and lefty and basically the university administration just throwing their hands up in the air and saying, do whatever you want with us. We don't care. But Steve Hood is another good player. And you could imagine if maybe some of these guys, him and one other person we'll mention, maybe stuck around with Walt Williams, you could have had a very different kind of beginning of the Gary Williams era. But obviously it was just Walt, and that's why he's the legend. And these guys, more power to them. I can't blame them for leaving the way they did. But, just kind of makes Walt's decision to stay even more prominent.
Yep, Steve Hood transferred out. A guy named Tion McCoy transferred out, who was a lesser-known player, but still a solid, rotational type player. Mustaf.
Jared Mustaf.
Gerard Mustaf.
Who just passed away a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. And his son Jaden almost committed to Maryland, but didn't. Mm-hmm. But he didn't transfer. He just left early and went pro at a time when it wasn't quite as common. He could have stayed as well. And the other person who transferred out, Ryan Williams, or he changed his name to Bison Dele later, and there's a lot of complications with him, which we're not going to get into. But at Maryland, as a freshman, played 29 games, 12.5 points, 6 rebounds, and 1.2 blocks as a freshman. Just think about that. Just think, Derek Queen's on the team right now. If he averages those numbers, that's pretty good.
Yeah, or Jordan Williams freshman. Those numbers are better than Jordan Williams freshman year.
Not as good as Joe Smith, but a very good freshman numbers. He went to Arizona and played from 98 to 91, 67 games. He almost the same numbers, actually, 12.4 points, 6.8 rebounds, and 1.2 blocks. That's partially because his first year there, he didn't have very good numbers. But his second year, he was a Pac-12 first-team player, NCAA all-region team, and the number 10 pick in the NBA draft. His second year there, he was one of the most dominant players in college basketball.
Yeah, that was when Lute Olson had Arizona rolling.
Yes.
And he was a big part of those teams. Again, another really good player. And you just name out those 4 guys you've just thrown out there that were on those Bob Wade teams, along with Walt Williams. I mean,
yeah,
that's good collection of talent right there. I mean, it really shows you how screwed Maryland got by this whole thing. And frankly, not even really just the NCAA, but the administration basically not caring about rolling over for them, which, again, I will retain my anger 35 years later, but I'll leave you to however you want to feel about that.
I'm still bitter about it. And the worst part is still that they created the sanctions. They came out in the middle of the season when Maryland was doing well and ranked.
Yep.
And they gave a 2-year ban, but the 2-year ban didn't start until the next 2 seasons. It wasn't current. And then they didn't select them for the tournament, which effectively made it a 3-year ban. Assholes.
Yep.
That was a dick move. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. No, there's a lot of that history that a lot of people don't know, but Maryland really got the ass end of this stuff
really badly. They lost those 4 guys, and then after that, the players that they weren't allowed to admit that Gary could have gotten in. We've talked about those guys: Lawrence Moten, Daniel Marshall, etc. How screwed the history of Maryland would be very different if not for that. Okay, that is the outgoing all transfer team 5 through 1. We'll see a recap of that at the end. But before we go on to the incoming team, we have some outgoing transfers, honorable mentions to talk about. Billy Bryant played in the 70s. He transferred to Western Kentucky. I didn't really know much about him. I did start watching at the end of his career, but I don't really remember much about him.
I'm not going to pretend like I know who that guy is.
He was a first-team OVC player. And he was drafted.
What conference is that?
Ohio Valley.
Oh, okay. It was like the Ovaltine conference or something.
Yeah. And it was drafted 85th in the NBA draft back when they had more than 2 rounds. That wouldn't even be a pick now, but he was drafted, which would effectively be, a 3rd-round pick if they did that now. So a quality player. Hakeem Hart left at the same time that Daryl Morsell. Oh no, he left a year later, didn't he?
Yeah, he was a year later. He got that first Willard year in, right? So
right.
But his 5th year, he decided to go to Villanova, and that was a bit of a bummer. He got a pretty good offer from them, but then hardly played at all. So that really just kind of that left a shitty taste in my mouth because he seemed like a really good kid and deserved a bit better than that.
Yeah, he was another one whose numbers as a freshman were almost non-existent, and every year got better. So the 8.3 points, 3.3 rebounds is a terp. That's the average. And then he went on to Villanova, didn't do much. He played from 20 to 23. Brian Magid, another guy from the 70s, 76 and 77, played at Maryland. He transferred to George Washington. He averaged only 3.7 points at Maryland, and it was down a level, but he did average 13.9 points, 1.8 rebounds, 2.2 assists. He was drafted 157th in the NBA draft, which I guess now would be an early 6th or maybe
like a two-way G League pick kind of thing.
Yeah, but again, we're talking about honorable mentions here.
Well, and Madge is interesting because, like, if you talk to some of the old guys, like they talk about him like he was a legend shooter. Like, and it never made any sense to me. Obviously, I wasn't born yet when this guy played, but seeing that he put up 3 points a game, they talk about him like he's like Chance Sniper Stevens, like he's just like the big shooter on the bench. But like you look and it's like, well, did he actually ever do anything or not?
Well, it was pre 3-point line. So if there was a 3-point line, maybe he would have been that specialist that could have even had a career in the NBA, maybe even, right?
Yeah.
Because who knows? But it was pre 3-point line. So I don't know. That's before my time too. I was born in 73 and I started watching late 70s Albert King, Buck Williams era. So he's like slightly before my time. All right.
Yeah, we'll need somebody to come in the comments or the thread and yell at us about how good Brian Magic was. That's fine.
Right. Tion McCoy, I just mentioned him. Another one of the guys who got caught up in the transfer with all the sanctions and everything. He transferred from Maryland to Texas. He averaged 7.9 points at Maryland, averaged 9 points at Texas, and a handful of other things. We kind of already covered it with Tion. I don't know if there's anything else you had to add for him.
No, just another good piece to that kind of last Wade team.
Right. Danny Miller, we've talked about on the show a couple of times, oddly enough. He played from 99 to 2001 at Maryland, transferred to Notre Dame, and he was on the Final Four team, the first Final Four team.
He was on the Final Four team in 2001. Right. I think he might have been Maryland's only other McDonald's All-American under Gary. But I'm pretty sure he was a McDonald's All-American and was a bit of a disappointment until he really started to turn it on his junior year, which was kind of part of leading into that Final Four year now, or the year they won the Natty in 2002. With him, it's interesting because if he doesn't leave, you don't end up with Byron Muton, and then you don't know whether that team's able to pull it off the year after or not. So,
well, I think Byron was on that team too. I think Byron played 2 years, if I'm remembering correctly, and there was kind of a struggle for that small forward spot.
That's what I'm saying. Only one of them was coming back, and it was
I
pretty.
See what you mean. Okay,
like because Byron wasn't going to transfer again, right? Because you had to sit out a year, so it was pretty clear you were only getting one of those guys, and it was pretty clearly going to be Danny stepping out. But good for him. He put up 14 and 6 at Notre Dame. That's a pretty good stat sheet. Good for him.
Not bad. An honorable mention transfer. And our last one, Charles Mitchell.
Chuck.
2013 and 14 at Maryland. And he transferred to Georgia Tech, averaged 6 points, 5.8 rebounds at Maryland, and 0.4 assists, oddly enough. And then went to Georgia Tech, averaged 10, 8.5, and 0.5 assists again. So, again, as an honorable mention player, not lighting the world on fire, but a solid player, 10 and 8.5 at Georgia Tech's pretty good for his last 2 years.
Yeah, he was just kind of a dude at Maryland. But, again, Georgia Tech, I don't think were those the Josh Pastner Georgia Tech teams, or was that before him? Was that the Paul, what's his name? That
Hewitt?
Weirdo, Paul Hewitt. Like the weirdo Final Four year they had.
I can't remember the exact timeline of that, but
yeah.
And I'm thinking maybe I made a typo. Is that 0.4 blocks? It had to be. Why would it be assists? I don't know.
It would be really funny to talk about how he was able to up his assists from 0.04 per game to 0.05 a game. That's a big step for him.
What if it's a typo? Maybe that's blocks. Okay, there's all the outgoing transfers. Now we're going to get to the incoming transfers. We're going to start with number 5, and we just talked about him. Byron Muton. He played at Tulane 98 and 99. He played 54 games. He averaged 13.5 and 3.7 rebounds, 1.3 assists, 1.6 steals. Stat stuffer. He was on the CUSA all-freshman team. Transferred to Maryland for 2001 and 2. Played 72 games there in 2 years, which is a lot back then because they played fewer games, but Maryland had such deep postseason runs. He averaged 10.3 points, 4.5 rebounds, 1.6 assists, and more importantly, was, as you said, the glue guy to the national championship team.
Dude, something about the Byron. I just call this the Byron. If you want to know what I feel like my expectations and hopes are for Deshaun Harris-Smith, it's pretty much this guy. Like, he was just the garbage man playing the three, just was willing to do all the hard, heavy work, really physical player, not a great shooter, not a great athlete, but just kind of figured out how to get it done. And just, it's hard to imagine that Natty team without him and without that smile and the kind of attitude that he brought to that team. Like, really, on top of the fact that you had four other starters who were like NBA guys, Byron just kind of put them all together.
Yeah, and it was a little bit of a struggle about who to put at 5 here. There could have been one or maybe 2 other people, stat-wise for sure.
Yeah,
but because
his importance is way more than the stat line for sure.
Right, exactly. So that's Byron Muton. He's the number 5 all-time incoming transfer. Number 4, Ben Coleman. I remember Ben Coleman. You may not.
Ben.
And
just barely.
And a lot of the other people who are listening, who are younger, aren't going to remember Big Ben. He played for Maryland from 83 and 84. He had started at Minnesota in 80 and 81, and the stats are really funny. At Minnesota, he played 40 games. He averaged 5.6 points, 3.5 rebounds, 1.1 assists, and 0.9 blocks. And where does that turn into? A 2-time All-ACC player at Maryland, and when he averaged 15.2 points, 8.2 rebounds, 1.4 assists, 1.2 blocks, the number 37 pick in the NBA draft, out of seemingly nowhere with nothing from Minnesota. And both of his years are very similar. It wasn't like he averaged 10 his junior year and 20 his senior year. They were both really right about the exact same numbers. ACC second team player twice.
Just an old school monster, man. I mean, just not particularly tall, not particularly athletic, but just a mauler. Like, you kind of miss guys like this in the modern game. Like, you just don't have them anymore, really. No,
because you have stretch fours now. You don't have. This is an old school power forward.
Yeah, it's like if you took Boom Osby and then stretched him out a couple more inches. That was Ben, man. Ben was something else. I actually remember more of him in the NBA, I think, than I do at Maryland, just because when I was growing up. But he was a heck of a player.
One of the funny stories. Do you remember when? I think it was the lefty tribute they did at Maryland, and Jeff and you and I, we got the press seats behind the basket, and it was before the game, and they invited back a whole bunch of lefty players, and there were like 40 of them there, and I just went down and started walking around, and I was turning around and I was like, oh shit, there's Tom McMillan, there's Ben Coleman, oh shit, there's all these Buck Williams, like all these guys, right? And they're all monstrous. When you said he wasn't that big, is what kind of reminded me of. But yes, he was monstrous, just not like those guys. The funniest part about that is all of a sudden the lights went out and they're going, bam, and they're doing the whole thing, and I'm standing on the floor next to these guys, and it was like, oh shit! And I ran to seat.
What am I doing here?
Yes, amongst all these.
I want to see you. I would have loved to see you walk out with all of these other like 6'8", 6'10" guys, and just.
I was standing there. I remember. Right next to Buck Williams when the lights went out, and I was like, "What?" And then it hit me, and I'm like, "Oh fuck!" I
can get out of here.
Can I edit that out? Okay. Anyway, here we go. Ben Coleman, number 4. All right, here we go. Number 3, Mr. Des Wells. Des Wells, great player for the Terps. He played at Xavier in 2012. Had some. Again, off the field stuff, off the court stuff, we're not going to talk about, although he was
fully exonerated.
Yes, exonerated. So that's good, but we're not going to talk about it. Xavier, 32 games. He averaged 9.8 points, 4.9 rebounds, 1.1 assists. As a freshman, made the A-10 all-freshman team at Xavier. Very good player. Left because of those complications. Came to Maryland. And the first 2 years weren't great, but as a senior, he was part of that turnaround when Trimble came in and was the first really good team under Turgeon and made people think, hey, maybe we have something here. 98 games, 14.3 points, 4.8 rebounds, 2.6 assists, 1.0 steals. He made Big Ten first team, Big Ten ACC third team, and he was an ACC all-tournament team member.
Yeah, he was a fun player to watch, man. He was such an athletic specimen, and then you could see him really develop the older he got. I think it was his junior year that Maryland was kind of asked, but they beat Duke 3 times. And I think that might have been when he won his ACC All-Tournament team because he went absolutely insane, beating Duke in the ACC tournament in the semi, I think, or in the quarters, and then a couple other games. But he was just like a human highlight reel, and you never knew what was coming. But it was also part of that. One of those flaws with that freshman year Melo team, that other than Dez and Melo, you didn't really have anybody who could handle the ball. And he was kind of asked to do things his senior year that maybe he wasn't best suited for. But he was a great player, man. He was a lot of fun. You wish you'd have 5 guys like that on your team.
This is who I was kind of hoping DHS would kind of become. Like that kind of player. It doesn't seem like it's going to turn into that. I mean, we're still early in DHS's sophomore year, so people watch us later. Hopefully,
I hope you come back 2 years from now and laugh at us for
hopefully he becomes becomes a Big Ten first team player. But that's what I was kind of hoping. And the biggest memory I have from Dez was it against Purdue, the dunk when it was one of the most posterizing dunks ever. Do you remember this? And the bench went absolutely apeshit, just went crazy. I'm trying to remember.
I remember one where he was so like high in the air and at an awkward angle, everybody just made 300 different memes of him. Like there was a meme of that painting on the Sistine Chapel wall where Adam is touching, reaching his hand out and God's reaching his hand out. And it was just Dez with the ball in his other hand. I think that might have been it. But
my thing is, I remember the bench reaction. They're all going like, "Oh my God!" Like they just saw the most insane thing ever.
No, every once in a while, he would just pull something out of his bag that you didn't think was physically or within the laws of nature to be possible. And he was just you love guys like that.
Great player for the Terps. Played 3 years. It was great to have him for those 3 years. The number 3 incoming transfer. Number 2, hinted at it at the beginning of this episode. Jamarr Young played 2 seasons with the Terps after transferring from Charlotte. He played for Charlotte for 3 seasons, 85 games, 16.7 points, 5.4 rebounds, 3.0 assists, 1.2 steals, Conference USA first team twice, Conference USA third team once, Conference USA Rookie of the Year. Comes to Maryland, does even better, averages 18 points a game, 4.7 rebounds, 3.6 assists, 1.3 steals, a Big Ten first team and a Big Ten second team. I propose to you right now that Jamarr Young may be the only player in the history of college basketball to be an all-conference player 5 times. Find another player who did that. I bet you can't.
It might
5 times.
It might not be possible. I'd be curious to find that out. And if anybody can find it out, I trust you to do it. Jamarr is interesting and a bit of a harbinger for things to come, right? Because when you got him from Charlotte in 2022, I don't think anybody expected he was going to come here and be better. It was really just okay, well, he's coming from a lower level. Can he at least play to that level at, in the Big Ten, especially if you're not a huge guy either. And he was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal, and just improved his game consistently. You could just count on him to do everything to the point where his super senior year, that team wasn't any good, but it wasn't Jameer's fault. He was literally counted on to do everything positive. So incredible guy, and really kind of the canary in the coal mine for the fact that now that you've got the transfer portal and you've got to replace guys all year, at least when it comes to guards, I think a lot of the time they're going to translate from lower levels. Not exactly. You can't expect to get a Jamarr Young kind of progression with every guy. But you're already seeing with Jacoby Gillespie this year, if you get these guys at these kind of mid-major levels who are putting up numbers and can really play, it is going to translate most of the time. And I think that's the future for a school like Maryland. if you're not going to be able to pay out big money for giant recruiting classes and all this stuff, and you're going to have to go in the portal all the time, these are the guys you need to find. And hopefully Jacoby Gillespie will be on this list in a couple years from now. It wouldn't shock me one bit.
Yeah. And then someone coming up on the honorable mention the year before Jameer too, though. They've had 3 in a row that look really good point guards.
All from lower levels.
Yes, there you go. Jamarr Young, the number 2 all-time incoming transfer. Any guesses as to who number 1 might be? Remember, we gave the hint that we're allowing JUCO transfers. Any guesses?
I mean, if you can't figure this one out, then what are you doing here?
There you go. Steve Francis, shooting guard. He played at Maryland for one season only. But look at the numbers. 17 points when he probably only played 25 minutes a game because they were just beating people so badly. 4.5 rebounds, 4.5 assists, and 2.8 steals. That is a stat stuffer like you don't normally see. He was a second-team All-American. He was first-team ACC. His jersey is in the rafters, and he was the number 2 pick in the NBA draft. He transferred for Allegheny Community College. I could not find stats for some of the others on the. You'll see Allegheny used to be a pipeline to Maryland.
Oh yeah,
and for some of those guys, I actually got stats for them. For Steve, I just couldn't find it. But there you go, the number 1 all-time transfer, Steve Francis.
So Steve transferred in my freshman year, and I remember coming on campus, and there was this murmur already about this guy, this kid he was a Blair kid, Montgomery County, went to JUCO, was transferring in. It was like, you're not going to believe this dude. And, he's a JUCO transfer. Now, that was more common 20, 25 years ago than it is now, for sure.
Yeah.
But I don't think anybody really expected he was going to be who he is.
It was he was the first practice player, Paul.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Everybody's been waiting for the same result since then because it was actually true for him.
Yeah, for once the hype machine actually in the summer actually worked. And I remember actually being at a bar or something and seeing Dick Vitale on ESPN being like, where do you see this Francis kid? Like doing his whole shtick. And I'm like, all right, okay, maybe there's something here. And then you go to Midnight Madness. And he put on a show. Like there's been a mythology that's kind of come around this thing, but I was there. A lot of us were there. We're all in our mid 40s now, having podcasts and doing this type of thing. It was the most unbelievable thing you'd ever imagine. He just went on the court and was just like, yeah, this is mine. I own this now. I'm going to do whatever I want. And literally nobody can do anything about it. And everybody's like, yeah, okay. Pretty much nobody can do anything about it. I mean, he was just insane. And then that whole year, he just took the whole ACC and was like, yeah, this is mine now. I'm gone. This belongs to me. And nothing will ever. Well, I'm getting to that part. Nothing will bother me more than talk about the worst matchup in the history of matchups is losing a Kenny. I was going to say a Kenny Beckway. That's not it. What is his name? The big center.
What are you talking about? The St. John's team, Ron Artest and those guys?
Yeah, but who was our center that year before Lonnie had to come in as a freshman?
Abene Akizi.
Abene Akizi, thank you. Losing him to that injury and then having to play that just tough as nails St. John's team in the tournament was just such a dagger because that team was, I don't think that team was really Final Four good, but Francis was good enough to carry them.
Oh, they could have made the Final Four.
Yeah. He was.
They could have.
Francis was so good, he pretty much could have took them there on his own.
Yeah, they didn't. And that year is the infamous shut the H up year when Maryland was playing Duke and they were, I think Duke was number 1 and Maryland was like 2nd or 3rd in the country. And it was something, I think it was 32-32 at halftime. An amazing back and forth, unbelievable. In the second half, Duke just trounced Maryland. And I think won by 15 or 20 points. And everybody, it was just the atmosphere. It was so volatile and there was so much anger. And that's when that whole incident happened for me. That game is the infamous.
Was that when the plastic bottle made its way towards,
no.
or is that a different game?
I think Plastic Bottle was gone in 54, wasn't it?
I don't
Or
know.
was it? I honestly
I don't
don't.
know.
It's all
They all run together at this point.
Yeah, it's 25 years ago now, so I'm not really remembering. Carlos Boozer's mom got hit in the head with a plastic bottle, and
acted like she was shot or something. But
yeah, and then there was a different game where not Norman Nolan, he played for Virginia. Who is the guy at Duke? Nolan
Smith.
Nolan Smith. Wait, am I mixing these guys up? Nolan Smith, I think it was. His family went into the student section, and there was a rumble in the student section with his family, right?
It's not Nolan Smith. I
Who
know
was
who
it?
you're talking about, and now I've got to.
Somebody who will listen to this and comment, and please let us know.
That's right.
I don't remember. Yeah,
someone will correct us because that's what you do.
There was lots.
It was Nate James, wasn't it?
Nate James. Yes, that's who it was.
He was a DC kid, so he had a ton of family in that game.
Yes, and Nate James' family, there was a big rumble in this.
Yep.
Anyway, whatever. Yeah. So
I mean, that Duke team was pretty epic too. That was the Elton Brand, Corey Maggette.
Jeez.
Like K paid all those dudes, and they really they paid out.
Yes, they were. Okay, so there you go. Steve Francis and some tangents as the number one all-time incoming transfer. Here we're going to get to some honorable mentions. Number one, Robert Carter transferred in from Georgia Tech, and he only played one season for Maryland, but he averaged 12.3 points, 6.9 rebounds, 1.9 assists, 1.3 blocks. And at Georgia Tech, he had 10.5 and 7.4. Solid player for the Terps in the season when they started the year in the top 5 rankings, and it kind of petered out for them.
Didn't quite work out. I think that was more of like the collection of talent was right, but the roster construct wasn't. You couldn't, in 2015, you couldn't really throw a guy like Carter and a guy like Diamond Stone on the court together and make it work. And clearly,
and DeMonte Dodd.
Yeah, Dodd too. That's right. So
he was on those teams, I think.
You take that team and maybe push it back to the late 90s, you might have had something, but not today.
Yeah, number 2 on the honorable mention list for incoming transfers, Ryan Randall. Sleepy Randall, 2002 to 2003. Another member of the Allegheny Community College pipeline. He averaged 8.1 points and 5.1 rebounds and was an ACC third team his senior year. Now, they won the championship in his junior year. He came off the bench and was part of the 4-man big man rotation during the championship year.
Another great guy who you don't think about how good that team was in 2003 after Juan and Lonnie and them left. Like that was a quality team with Ryan and Taj down there and Steve Blake and Drew Nicholas. Like that was a pretty good team. They get a decent break in that Sweet 16 game. We might be having a very different discussion.
Another Michigan State loss.
Yeah.
And here is a third is Matt Rowe, played at Maryland in 1991. He transferred in from Syracuse. He only played one season, but he averaged 17.8 points, 5.5 rebounds, 2.6 assists, and was a third-team All-ACC player. Do you remember much about Matt Rowe?
I couldn't pick him out of a lineup, but I thank him for his service.
He was on the team with Walt. He was the number 2 guy to Walt.
I would be able to recognize him if they were on TV that year.
We got to ask next time we have Walt. We're going to ask him about Matt Rowe. Tell us about Matt Rowe.
Put it on the list.
Fats Russell played one season at Maryland. We hinted at him when we were talking about Jamarr Young. Fats Russell transferred in. He played one season at Maryland in 2022 after playing at Rhode Island. When he was at Maryland, he averaged 15.1 points, 4.1 rebounds, 3.7 assists, and 1.3 steals, racking up stats in a really tough season.
He was a good player and really got let down by Turge. I mean, Turge gave up 8 games into his senior year. It's tough to convince a guy to come and transfer to, his last season of college basketball and then skip out on him. And the rest of the season was just a death march. Like,
yeah,
that'll always bum me out about him. I hope he makes something of himself. Maybe graduated from here or got something out of it, because I always
Maybe he's
felt bad
playing in
about his
Europe or
situation.
something.
Yeah, I hope so.
It seems like he's good enough for that. So
He's a good player.
I don't know what he's doing. That's another thing you guys can let us know in the comments what Fats Russell is doing. Number 5 on the honorable mention list is Jamar Smith, 2003, 2004, third member of the Allegheny Community College pipeline. He averaged 9.6 points and 6.5 rebounds. He was an ACC all-tournament member team.
Good player, old school big man. You didn't want him shooting anything more than like 5 feet away from the basket, but if you got him in there, he was really effective. Another guy on that 2003 team with Blake and those cats that could have gone a lot farther. In fact, if I remember correctly, I think we were talking about this on another episode for some stupid reason, but that Michigan State team they lost to, he had a chance to tie it, I think, maybe it was the last possession, or maybe they would have took the lead. I don't know, but towards the end, he had a nice little runner off the boards that didn't go. And if that went again, history might have been a little bit different.
And the 2004 tournament was the John Kilchrist show.
Well, that was the ACC tournament. He was a big part of that.
That's the ACC all tournament selection. Okay, last member of the honorable mention team, Rashid Suleiman. He came in with Robert Carter in 2016. Again, part of those huge expectations preseason. With Trimble and Diamond Stone and Jake Layman, 11.3 points, 3.5 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 1.2 steals. And when he was at Duke, he was actually on the ACC all-freshman team. He played there 3 years. Another one with some off-the-court issues that we're not going to get into. But Suleiman was a pretty solid player, even though the season didn't work out the way people had hoped.
Yeah, 1-year rental, but he came in and did a job. I got nothing but love for him, despite being a Dookie.
Yeah, the Dookie part of it was whatever, but he was solid, and at least preseason, it was very exciting because Maryland was top 5 for the first time in I don't know how long.
Yeah, at least a decade.
That was when people still had hopes that Terzian was going to be great, and it did not work out that way. All right, the last thing we're going to do is compare the outgoing transfer team to the incoming transfer team. And it looks like this. The outgoing transfers, I did my best to kind of put them in a lineup. Seth Allen, Nick Faust, Steve Hood, Daryl Morsell, and Brian Williams versus the incoming transfers, Jamarr Young, Steve Francis, Des Wells, Byron Muton, and Ben Coleman.
Yeah. This is not going to be particularly close.
See, that was my initial reaction at all.
That was my initial reaction, and it's my current reaction after you had your initial reaction to my initial reaction.
So here's what I'll just say. At center, Brian Williams versus Ben Coleman. Brian Williams' peak is better than Ben Coleman's peak. He was the number 10 pick in the draft. So at center, I give a tiny edge to the outgoing transfers. You got Daryl Morsell versus Byron Muton. Close, but I'm going to give a tiny edge to Daryl Morsell over Byron Muton. Small forward, Steve Hood versus Des Wells. It's kind of a push here. I know Des had better numbers as a Terp, but Steve Hood was actually drafted in the NBA for a reason. And he was a 2-time conference player, albeit it was the Colonial. But it's kind of a push. Now, here's where the incoming transfers absolutely blow the outgoing transfers out of the water. You got Jamarr Young versus Seth Allen. Jamarr Young destroys Seth Allen by a lot. It's more than marginal. And then you've got Steve Francis versus Nick Faust.
Yeah.
At the shooting guard spot.
Anybody want to take that one on?
That's enough there.
Yeah.
But it's not as crazy. Like if the outgoing transfers were able to pull a Wisconsin or Virginia type game and just force it to be half court and just feed it to Brian Williams all the time, like maybe it could be close. It could be close.
Dude, Ben Coleman played in the NBA for 10 years. Like he was
good. He was good.
He was a good player. Like, I mean, maybe you give Bison Dele like a hat tip on that, but it's not as big a difference. I don't care that he was drafted 10th. Like he was in the NBA.
It's true.
He was fine, but like so was Ben Coleman.
Yeah.
Morsell against Muton, I mean, that's kind of a wash for me. Morsell was probably a slightly better player, but we also don't know what Muton could have been if he was dependent on to score, or if he was dependent on to do, to do things.
His numbers were higher at Tulane than they were at Maryland, so that gives you some kind of, as a freshman and sophomore, gives you some kind of idea if he hadn't had 4 NBA players next to him, what his numbers would have been like at Maryland.
Exactly. And then, Steve Hood versus Des Wells. Again, I didn't watch Steve Hood, but he would have been drafted in like the NBA's 5th round. If the NBA had 5 or 6 rounds, Des Wells would have been.
He was a second round. He was like 42nd overall.
Okay. That was somebody else.
He was a very good player.
Okay, he's a good player. He's probably, so I'll give him that. Okay, hat tip, maybe he's better than Des Wells, but Des Wells was a really excellent college basketball player.
Yes.
And then the guard spots, I'm not even going to address.
Right.
I don't feel like we need to even. I don't even need to waste your time with any of that.
So yeah, but the overall takeaway that you talked about kind of early on, the outgoing transfers, it's not that bad.
Yeah, Maryland's been pretty lucky, and again, you can take 2 to 3 of this top, 8, 10, 12 transfers out, all came from the wake of the NCAA stuff.
Yeah.
So if that doesn't happen, Maryland's been pretty fortunate when it comes to the transfer game up to this point. Now we know it's a whole new ball game now. So the next 5-10 years, you're going to see all these guys completely recycled. You will probably have completely new outgoing and incoming transfers that are better than all these guys, because that's just going to be the way the game is going now. So that's kind of why it was kind of a cool idea. Like, let's do this now and then look back a couple of years from now and see kind of where it is. I can already tell you right now, Ian Martinez is going to be on one of these lists because he's at Utah State. He's averaging like 22 a game right now. So just right off the top, you can imagine.
Does he count as an incoming or outgoing?
Yes, he's on both lists.
He probably should have been on the list. I didn't get him in there. He probably should have been honorable mention, maybe.
Yeah, maybe just a one for the future kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you could imagine Gillespie and some of these other guys who might have a shot at being on the incoming list. So it's going to be
maybe someone like Jamie Kaiser figures it out and ends up supplanting Nick Faust from the outgoing team. Right?
Yeah. John Lamoth put up like 22 the other night for with George Mason or wherever he landed. So
yeah,
like it's going to be weird.
Yeah.
it's going to be weird. So we're laying our marker now.
Then like you said, the funny thing with Ian Martinez is an incoming and outgoing transfer. So
yes,
what do you do? He
probably doesn't make the incoming list, but he will make the outgoing list.
Maybe he might. Yeah, he could.
I don't think he put up enough numbers at Maryland to justify that.
And he could have been an honorable mention, maybe. I don't know. Yeah. All right. Well, there you go. This was a special episode for IMS Radio. We're collecting data for something else and realize that this might be a fun thing to do. So we'd love to see your guys' comments, trash us, tell us who we forgot. Like, maybe did we forget Ian Martinez? And, what do you think?
Yeah. We're going to be off for Thanksgiving. So everybody enjoy your holiday. Watch this, trash us, do as you will. And we'll be back to talk some stuff, I guess the first week of December, right?
The week after Thanksgiving, that's right. And we'll see. The Terps will have a number of games between now and then. We'll see how it goes.
Better have a Villanova win in there. They lose that game, we're going to be grumpy.
We're going to be grumpy. All right. Thank you guys very much. This is IMS Radio.